today is going to be Dr. Eugene Wan, who is a senior research associate here at Cornell University, doing a lot of great research in the area of aquaculture feed. I'll let him start us off.
Oh. All right. So yeah, I'm Eugene Wan. I'm a senior research associate in animal science. Teach fish physiology and some aquaculture lectures around campus. Run an aquaculture research lab, like Mike said, mostly dealing with sustainable feed, but we also do some fisheries work and some other R&D. My students in the back building a AI robot and all kinds of stuff. We can piggyback on this research. I'm also the academic coordinator for Shoals Marine Lab. So on campus, if it has anything to do with fish or aquaculture, I probably have something to do with it. I just realized I didn't eat lunch. Isn't that crazy? I'm talking about food. So let me just see how this works. All right. Unfortunately, I'm one of those guys that waves their cursor around all over the place, so I won't have that. I'm going to start off by giving some background to this, and then I'll get into our research. So this first few slides is going to set the context for why the other speakers that we're going to hear from today from industry, we're very fortunate to have, why their work is relevant. So the human population, of course, is growing rapidly, putting pressures on all kinds of resources. And a report from the FAO, Food and Ag Org, under the UN, actually quite a while ago now, 2013, projected into 2030 that in the slot here from the inception of that report to the end in 2030, that we would have to increase seafood production by 40 million tons to accommodate this population growth. So that's a pretty staggering number if you can bring yourself to visualize that. So we got to ask our question, where's that seafood going to come from? Okay. Well, if you look at our traditional wild fisheries, we have a timeline on the bottom, pretty much exactly my timeline. And on the vertical axis, the wild fisheries that we're going after, you can see that almost the entirety of those targeted fisheries are maxed out right now, okay? What you're seeing here visualized is the kind of maxing out of the ocean in terms of wild caught fish, either overfished or what is being referred to sometimes as maximally sustainably fished, maximum sustainable yield. But that sustainability is starting to be brought into a little bit of question, right? Because we're changing the oceans so much that that predictability and those management capacities are becoming difficult. But it's clear that this increase in seafood demand from the growing human population cannot be met by wild fisheries alone anyway. So if we pull this back into a little longer context, looking halfway back into the last century on the bottom, and the total tonnage of seafood produced, we have the wild fisheries in orange along the bottom. And I've superimposed the human growth population along the bottom as well, and there's billions. And we came out of the beginning of this in the 50s from World War II with a bunch of really phenomenal U-boat hunting technology that was converted into fishing technology. We have the baby boom going on, the green revolution, allowing for much more land-based crop production to be produced, and the human population is growing very rapidly here. And you can see a steep increase in the amount of wild fish that were caught, again in the orange, up until around the late 80s or so, when that tapers off and flatlines, and that's what you see in that previous slide. That's essentially the ocean being maxed out there, okay, and it's never gone up. And that's 30 years ago already, okay? That's 30 years ago already. So, that's not trivial. Everyone kind of, in your spare moments, think about what that actually means. We've maxed the ocean out. But at that same time, above that, in blue, we can see really the serious advent of aquaculture, fish farming, taking off in response to more demand, but not any more production from the ocean. And that's a pretty steep curve. That is the fastest growing sector of agriculture in the world. You can see in 2012, it's already surpassed beef production. It's over a decade ago, right? And now we're at the point where aquaculture supplies around half or maybe a little bit more of all seafood in the world. And by the end of the century, according to that FAO report, sorry, end of the decade, we're looking at it hitting aquaculture hitting about almost a third of all seafood production. So what that means is that the wild fishing will continue at maximum capacity, probably. I don't think anyone has the ability to alter that, but all additional supply for that demand for seafood is going to come from aquaculture. And fish are not the worst cultivars in the world, okay? I don't know, I can't remember what my top line there says, but this is where we're getting into the importance of feed. Anytime you have a production animal, okay, it doesn't matter what it is, you have to feed it. And in the orders of magnitude that we're talking about in feeding a population, feeding those farm animals, animals that we are going to eat is a big deal, and how we go about doing it, okay, in terms of sustainability and cost and everything. Luckily, though, fish are pretty good cultivars insofar as they are very efficient at taking food and assimilating it and turning it into fish, okay? So we call that feed conversion efficiency. That's the words that are blocked out up there, which is to say that their feed conversion ratio, the amount of feed it takes to produce a unit of food, is very low, which is good. So in other words, in this particular graph, we're seeing that the salmon on the left will take 1.2 units of feed to produce a unit of fish. And these numbers can be presented in different ways, but you'll always see this trend among the various production animals. So we have fish on the left and chicken always coming in, a pretty respectable second. Pork is usually about double that. And then on the right, we have the ruminants like cows. That says cows and sheep up there, okay? So fish are clearly the best cultivar that we can grow, right? Well, what this doesn't show, you have to take that with a grain of salt, because the feeds that are going into these production systems are very different from one another, mainly insofar as fish have very high protein requirements in their diets compared to these other cultivars, okay? And what do we mean by high levels of protein? Well, when we're talking about the things that Americans like to eat, like salmon, that's upwards of 50%, okay? Half their diet is protein, okay? So for all these fish that we have to produce, we have to procure that first to give to them. Also, these carnivorous fish that are the high value ones, again, that the West likes, tend to need also some animal protein in that feed. But even the herbivorous and omnivorous fish that are kind of feeding the masses around the world require, usually around 40-ish%, I would say, as low as 35 up into the 40s. That can be mostly, in large part, vegetable proteins, perhaps, or non-animal proteins. But that's still a big dietary protein requirement compared to, for example, chickens and pork, which are more in that 25 to 30% range. Okay. So fish are efficient, yes, but aquaculture as a whole is still going to require a whole lot of protein in its magnitude. And particularly for those carnivorous fish that, again, the West likes, Part of that protein generally has to come from animals, and fish meal, a commercial commodity we're talking about here, it tends to be at least part of that. And that is like we said, a commodity that's made from catching these wild forage fish like menhaden and anchovies, herring, etc., just to make protein meals and oils for livestock, okay, for animals, not for human consumption. And as you can imagine, this is controversial because this is an important low trophic level of the food web. We're taking out in large quantities. And frankly, at this point, the demand is so high that it's just really become expensive. I'd say prohibitively expensive to use a whole lot of. But that controversy is a stigma to the aquaculture industry, okay, in that it's ecologically and economically unsustainable, okay, ecologically, but also just feed is the #1 production cost in growing fish, largely because of this fish meal component. So when we say we're here talking about alternatives to fish, to alternative feeds today in aquaculture, this is what the alternative is to mostly, okay, is the commodity fish meal. Now, that said, probably mostly because of the cost, the rate of fish meal that's going into your typical aqua feed today is actually not that high, anywhere from really 0, but say 5 to the upper end, maybe 30% of a given fish aquaculture feed is fish meal. These numbers are hard to come by. A lot of feed companies, even though you're paying them astronomical amounts of money, do not tell you what's in their feed because they claim it's proprietary. That's from my conversations over the years, what I've gleaned. So although, relatively small fraction of a given feed, again, the top line means aqua feed is fish meal, the sheer volume of feed that is being produced now, because the aquaculture industry has grown so much, adds up. And if we look at this pie graph of all the fish meal being produced, at this point, aquaculture is taking the lion's share of it, about 3/4 of it. Okay. Now, one nice thing that isn't shown here is that about 1/4 of that is made from seafood processing byproducts these days. So it's not totally wild caught fish, but it still makes a big impact on the forage basin wild ecosystems. But at this point, because of the stigma, because of the cost, finding sustainable protein sources that are alternatives to this is, I would say, easily the industry's top priority, or one of the very top priorities. So some of the go-tos to that are where you would think. So soy is definitely a big part of aqua feed and all animal feeds these days. So going to these plant derivatives that are high in protein. These are de novo. We're growing them just to feed to farm animals. But they're not without their baggage. Soy, for example, can have anti-nutritional properties. I mean, they're hard to digest. And if we're going to go so far as to be critical of catching wild fish and taking those out of the ecosystem, we have to remember that 1,000 by 1,000 miles in the center of this country, 1 million square miles, have been converted from prairie into farms growing animal feed, right? So there are real prairies and ecosystems out there that have been probably irreversibly altered, even growing these alternatives. So we definitely need those. They're definitely a big part of animal production. But in my lab, we look for what I like to refer to as somebody's big pile of stuff that they're throwing out that has protein in it. And we try to find a way to use that, salvage it. And especially if we're talking about animal proteins, a good place to go for that is byproducts after our food animals are processed. First and foremost, my favorite being seafood, right? Because even after this fish is filleted, there's still a lot of soft tissue on there, and it's fish protein, and fish protein grows fish better than anything else. I've also used chicken carcasses. That works very well too, almost comparably to fish. Believe it or not, being in essentially the cow department, I've not tried cow, but that might be an option out there. I'm also working with an industrial collaborator, looking at seafood rejects like squid and I'll show a slide of this a little later, invasive species like the carp out west. Okay, but there are all kinds of industrial organic byproducts that have potential, just from various processes making other things and that have organic leftovers. Some of them can be used directly, possibly like defatted microalgae from biofuel production. My colleague, Dr. Lay, in animal science is looking at that for chickens, and we might venture into fish applications for that. Various grains from distilling and that sort of thing. And then, as you probably are unfortunately aware, we waste a lot of our human edible food to the tune of somewhere around 60%. And some of these can be used directly, some not. Like, for example, you can't feed discarded food to farm animals as per regulations, but we can use some of these, if not directly, then indirectly by using insects as an intermediary to salvage the nutrients in that and turn them into these just beautiful little packages of protein and lipids that can then be used for animal feeds. So we used to do that across the street, but COVID shut us down. But luckily, I don't have to talk about it because we have experts here to fill us in on their work today. Okay. But in general, what we're looking for here is using somebody's liability as a resource, right? They have to throw these things anyway. We don't want to end up in landfills. And if there's something, particularly protein in there, that can be turned into a fish meal alternative, then it's a win-win situation on both sides, right? You can't see it up there, but my colleague, also in animal science, Dr. Selvaraj, has done some work on housefly larvae. I'm not going to belabor this. It's shown that they're a good source of protein and lipids, and particularly in methionine, which tends to be a limiting essential amino acid in protein alternatives for aqua feeds. They're good at remediating organic waste and manure. Soldier fly larvae as well, really excellent nutritional profiles. They can, again, be used to salvage nutrients in other organic materials so that they are recycled instead of discarded. And those are already hitting industrial use and production. So these have been approved in the EU first and then in the US. So hopefully we will start seeing these more and more in aquaculture feeds. But the room for research there is, I would say, affecting their quality in a number of areas. First, what you feed them, could emanate in the final larva product. The harvesting of the timing, because these are insects going through various stages of growth and eventually metamorphosis, and then the way in which that meal is processed. And my guess is that we're going to hear about that today from our other guests from River Road and Clean Label, which I'm very much looking forward to. My colleague or industrial collaborator, I guess we'll say, in E&A marketing outside of Albany, he's always coming to me with interesting products, and one of those is the invasive carp out west. It always amazes me that some people haven't seen this. If you don't know what this is, and just crack a beer and get some popcorn out and hit YouTube and look up invasive carp out west. It's absolutely choking the streams in the Mississippi basin. These are invasive carp that are wrecking those ecosystems. but they're fish, right? And they could be, and they are a good source of protein and lipid. We have had some carp meal samples already that are on deck to be incorporated into some experimental feeds. And what we're hoping here, again, is using somebody else's liability. So if we can come up with a use for this carp, if it's not being eaten, obviously, it would be preferable if people would eat these directly, but Americans tend to not like carp. If we could, again, resolve two issues at one time by creating a commercial fishery, incentivizing that fishery to mitigate the ecological damage of these fish, while also providing high quality protein for aquaculture feeds, we have another win-win situation. And then the main pet project that we actually are implementing at the moment, some help from folks in the room here, is looking at a way to salvage fish processing byproducts, meaning fish carcasses. Because again, these are absolutely fantastic sources of high quality protein. It's fish. It's what we're trying to replace. Same stuff, but from a sustainable source. Okay, and this material sometimes, at least from the processor's point of view, has to be discarded. And the reason this whole project came up was because a fish processor that we knew about 20 miles from our fish farm was paying to throw their fish carcasses in a dumpster, while literally 15 miles up the road, we're paying hundreds of thousands of dollars for feed that costs that much because of fish meal, fish protein in it, okay? This is by any standards not acceptable. And so why not look at a way to connect these two dots, right? So we have a process by which we take this raw material, the fish carcasses, we grind them up, and this is with the guts in, and we add some pH, some acid to drop the pH, which preserves it. And those endogenous enzymes in the fish's gut essentially digests itself, kind of refer to it as turning the fish inside out. And what you end up there with is C after a few days, which is referred to as fish silage or fish hydrolysate. It's essentially a smoothie that is fish having broken itself down. Okay, and that has been, and that's obviously got a good nutritional profile. And that's been around for a while, but people were having a hard time converting that liquid into a solid. So very timely that Joe Regenstein is in the room, and with his advice years ago now, we applied a very simple, like kitchen level chemical process to that, and now we are producing solid pellets from this fish silage or fish hydrolysate. And we're testing that across the street now in our new aquaculture facility. So this, we're hoping, can, again, replace controversial fish meal while reducing that organic landfill, right? This fellow was paying to throw his carcasses into. So it's eliminating his disposal costs, and it's really culminating in a complete use of that marine resource, right? Which is precious. I think we should all consider that as a precious resource and certainly not waste it. What this does, though, is creates kind of a new type of system where we can get this material from the dock or the processing plant that's near the dock directly to the farm, okay? And that will reduce the carbon footprint, I'm hoping. Because instead of taking, the alternative to that would be taking these carcasses, transporting them to a rendering plant, transporting that material to a feed mill, and then transporting that to a fish farm. It's a lot of energy goes into that. I'm hoping with this, we can just go directly from A to B, collect this stuff, make feed out of it, and apply it to growing more food fish. The technology is fairly simple, and hopefully this will have some utility. I'm good. And also in developing countries. Oh yeah, that's good. Except for probably on this Okay, and this is outside of the topic for today, but I want to show this for the subsequent slides. So we have these sustainable, proteins going into our feeds, or will be going into our experimental feeds. On the back end of that, our fish are producing wastewater, so we're also using plants to take up the nutrients in that wastewater so that it's not being discharged into watersheds, right? A lot of our farm runoff throughout the country and even here is ending up in the lakes and causing harmful algae blooms, for example. Okay. So taking this all together, we're trying to work on a new or prove that a paradigm here that is based on the new buzzword that everyone's talking about now, which is circular economies. I like to use the term networked economies. It's still the same concept where you're taking outputs from one production system and using them as inputs for another production system and continuing that chain. Okay, taking the outputs from that and using them as inputs to another production system. Right, they're not always circular, but the point being is any industry or any production system can still offload whatever's coming out of it as an input to something subsequent to it. So in our case, we're, as I described, we have our inputs, right? We have our feed, but we're trying to use byproducts, for example, from animal or seafood processing or other industrial side streams, either directly or to produce insects, right? So that's somebody else's output becoming the aquaculture input. Then we produce our fish. That's our main product. But then, of course, we have outputs like effluent, and that can be used to grow plants while simultaneously taking up the nutrients again, so they're not discharged into the environment, cause eutrophication. And then we have our own byproducts too, post-processing, which we can create feed out of, maybe not to the same species, but to an alternate species. And herein, we're trying to promote this philosophical concept that, it's not waste if you use it. If you use it, it becomes a resource, right? So I think in modern times, we really need to become more resourceful along these lines in all industries, not just aquaculture. Okay, that's about all I got. And here's just a few pictures of the new aquaculture lab that we opened up across the street, specifically designed for exploring sustainable proteins and ingredients in fish, and piggybacking all kinds of other research on top of that. So I will be around if anyone wants to talk about any of this stuff. I will talk forever about fish.
All right. Thank you. Any questions for Dr. Wan? And I will come around with the microphone just so our virtual participants can hear us.
Questions.
Virtual participants, feel free to unmute or put your questions in the chat.
More of a couple of comments. When you talk about feed conversion, the other thing that everyone has to remember is feeds are generally dry and fish are generally wet. And a lot of plant byproducts are going into the animal feed system. It's part of why people, I think, don't understand animal agriculture, often don't realize how much byproducts. And one of the, to me, most fascinating, you sort of in passing talked about this grain byproduct. The food versus fuel argument is very fallacious because, in fact, using the starch for fuel makes the corn that remains actually much better for ruminant feeding. But a couple more direct issues. A lot of this material that you're working with still has human food. Our research many years ago was minced fish and using a mechanical deboner. And the question is, how useful is the byproduct of mechanical deboning as a feed source for fish compared to the full waste processing? And there are also the question of using of heads for human food without having to go through the fish. And the one other comment is a lot of this insect relevance. A quarter of the world's population is Muslim. And there are some questions as to acceptability of insects in the Muslim community, particularly some of the ones being used for that purpose. But the big question is human versus.
I actually had a very similar concern in terms of talking about the animal byproducts that are going into the feed, because there's like a lot of species of fish that Muslims don't eat, and I myself am Muslim, and to know that there's animal byproduct going into certain feed it brings up a bit of an issue. Is like how does that stand in terms of marketability of the product and like the integrity of what's being sold, whether it be from the feed or the end product of like the actual fish at market?
You're probably the better.
Let me tackle the specific.
Joe is an expert in the field of halal and kosher. Yeah.
This has been an issue and will be more of an issue down the road as people become more aware of what is being fed to animals. For Jews, for kosher, it is not an issue. For Muslims, in addition to halal, there's a concept of tayyab, for clean or wholesome. And a number of these feed ingredients from the animal side of the house do not necessarily qualify as tayyab and are considered najis, which is filth. And we're seeing and beginning to see in the marketplace that split being identified and people addressing that audience with vegetarian feeds for animals going into the Muslim market.
And yeah, it depends on your market, because a different market could insist on there being just no fish meal in there and embrace insects or whatever going into it, as long as it's not fish meal, right? So if a particular market has those criteria as a selling point or as a necessity, then that market would need to do due diligence in tracing the source of where that's coming from.
Please address the minced fish issue.
Which will
Use of more of the fish byproduct for human food before it goes into your animal feed system, and what the implications of that, because that is, of course, mainly the protein.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's probably more of a marketing issue than anything, and a cost point issue. So if you can get people to eat anything directly, yeah, that's probably the most direct route to feeding. The first slide here, all 8 billion of us, right? If you can't do that, though, then converting that to animal feeds to subsequently produce a high quality, animal protein product is a good use of it, I would say, right?
Thank you. Any other questions? Virtual participants, nothing? Oh, question over here.
Like a game show host.
Hi, Dr. Wan.
Hi.
So in other agriculture sectors, we tend to try to avoid feeding self to self for disease control purposes. Like mad cow disease is kind of the most popular example of that. So in feeding fish from wild populations and waste fish to your aquaculture product, how are you ensuring that you're minimizing disease control?
Right. Well, it's probably more of a human perception issue than anything. So my slide there, it said we could take our fish and grind it up and make food. I said we could feed it to a different species to bypass that. And you have a lot of control there, because if you have a mono species coming out and you are feeding it to a mono species, right? I mean, the reality is, hatchery folks here, fish are cannibals in a lot of cases. I don't know of there's any instances of prions in fish. I've never come across that. I would say for production, though, I would avoid feeding the same species to the same species. What I would envision, I think, is either within a farm diversifying to multiple species, or just being in collaboration with a farm of a different species, and you could swap, right? In this futuristic relationship where we're, salvaging this material, turning it into feed. but feeding it to another species, right? So we have more than just salmon grown. Or converting it into people food, right?
All right, we can probably get one more question if there's one more question. All right. Thank you, Dr. Wan. All right, I am going to pull up our next presenter speaker, and I'll let him do a more formal introduction of himself and his company or his employer. I don't know if either. Yep. Dr. Radu Popa is with River Road Research, again, expanding on this, looking deeper into alternative fish feeds for aquaculture production. So increasing sustainability through decreasing our use of the wild harvest, wild catch of our fishery resources. All right, so Dr. Radu.
Go forward.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Radu Popa. I work with a company called River Road Research, who do R&D on black soldier fly larvae. Today, I want to talk about preoccupations we have regarding this industry. I'm not here to beat the drum on how good they are. I'm here to tell you about concerns we have, and not about the quality of it. It's about the chances of it to occupy a sizable part of this market. You are aware, and I need this context to tell the story. You are aware that humans have managed to culture more species of insects than one. Probably the oldest ones are honeybees and then silk moths. Then you see a lot of agriculture controlling insects that are using three purposes. They are either predators, parasites, or pollinators. You have the examples on the screen. And then there is insects people used as food. People have eaten insects for food a long time. I'm talking about insects that we're culturing to be eaten. And you already know about mealworms, crickets, locusts that are presently cultured to be eaten by humans, with the requirements that they have. And those requirements go mostly through FDA. The margins for errors are lesser, the requirements are more stringent. So FDA regulates differently whatever we produce for eating relative to AFCO, which American Association for Feed Control Officials is, which deals with feeds. So right now I'm talking about insects as feeds, not insects as food, okay? And I was at the conference for insects as feed and foods in Quebec about a few months ago, and about 90% of everything was about black soldier flies. For some reasons, they got to be more favorable in this direction, and you'll see why. I'm not going to give you much details about what this insect is all about. It's suffice to say, it's a dipteron. It comes from West Indies, and it goes through developmental stages. I'm going to tell you when I talk about the construction of this industry, what those stages are. The reason why people have opted for insects, and it's relevant for our story today, is I pulled out 4 reasons in here to make the story shorter. One, there is a very high diversity of insects. There may be probably more insect species on Earth than anything else on Earth combined with regards to animals. And that means we have a lot of physiology to choose from. And that means we have a lot of composition to have. There is a lot of behavior or sizes, rate of growth, and all that. There is also fast growth. Because of the way they are constructed, they cannot withstand winters very well. So they have to make everything happen within a very short time interval. Hopefully, they can cram everything within 1 season. which means that the growth rate of the young stages, which are of interest when you produce protein, the growth rates of the young stages are tremendous. In black soldier fly larvae, to give you an example, you start from micrograms. Micrograms, you cannot even see them. They are that small. And you end up with some elephants, some of them are 400 milligrams in 3 weeks. They grow 2,000 times their body size, and they eat 10 times their body weight every day. So that's why it is preferable to use them. Then there is the fact that they're highly tolerant to density. And I'm talking numbers, I'm talking about weight density. They're very high tolerant to density, which means that you can jam a lot of them in a very small space. It's much more than you can probably jam cows or anything else, or chicken. I'm talking on 1 square meter equivalent of a growth bin. You are producing in 11 days. The production cycle is 2 weeks because you need time to clean. But in 11 days, you are producing 12.5 kilograms. It's a mathematics. How many you add? You have to add 38,000 exactly, and you are producing 12.5 kilograms exactly. That is a monstrous amount of meat produced in a very small footprint. That's why they are so preferable. Then they also use a very small amount of water. At least in the, I do not know other insects, but at least in the case of black soldier flies, it is less than 100 liters per kilogram of protein you are producing. In cows, it's like 2 metric tons. Okay. And they also have a very simple but very efficacious way of dealing with infections. They have a simple immunology, but it's based on this polypeptides between, say, 30, 40 to up to 80, 100 amino acids. After they fold, they're called antimicrobial peptides. 4 packages of genes, everything is already studied and sequenced, and they already know from the wrapping, the folding, they already know the structures of it and how they function. In most cases, this is about positively charged overall structures, and they're also amphipathic as an overall structure. So the general mechanism, but this is not always the case, the general mechanism is because of their charge, they can move to this mucus that surrounds bacteria capsule glycocalyxes that are rich in negative charges. They reach the membrane, and because they behave like a soap, like an amphipath, they embed themselves into the membrane, but because of the way they're oriented, they are creating a pore. And in most cases, the mechanism is based on forcing a leakage of cytoplasm toward the outside, which exhausts the metabolism of the bacterium. It weakens the bacterium, not kills them. It's not a proper antibiotic that will shut off the ribosome or something. This is a different mechanism, but very, very efficacious. And there is 2 major classes. There is about 4 or 5 classes of antimicrobial peptides, AMPs, but there is 2 major classes. In black soldier fly larvae, the ones that are called the secropins are the most abundant in amount, but the most widespread throughout the insects, AMPs, are called defensive. I'm going to get to the story in a minute or so. With regards to conversion, and that kind of wraps up why we promote this insect, so I go to the bad news about this industry. More or less, if you glance over this entire diagram and you begin from garbage on the left, on the upper left corner, and then you see the prep food for the larvae, and then you end up with the protein. More or less, you start with 1 metric ton of food waste, and you end up with about 5% of it to 6% of it in terms of protein. So remember this number, because I'm going to ask you to recollect it when you do a calculation at the very end. It's about 5%. From wet food waste to a dry protein that I end up putting into a bag and sell. With regard to land efficiency, they are probably as efficient as anaerobic digestion. When you take waste of any sort, organic waste from the city, and you move it through composting, you probably need about 200 to 700 square meters of land for every 1 metric ton per day. So if you tell me the size of the city, I can tell you how much land you need for composting facilities. That's the word. And anaerobic digestion will take probably about 25 square meters. In black soldier fly, it's about 60 square meters, and that includes everything, the facilities that will host the fermentations and produce the eggs and larvae and micro babies, and the facilities that are growing the larvae and everything else. And that will give you a relative representation of how much do you need for a city of 1 million people. And if I only take 100 kilograms of whatever they produce as a food waste per year, at the national level, a country like United States, this type of culture, this type of eating behavior, the entire country wastes about 200 kilograms of food waste every year per person. So this is how you calculate your number, okay? About 50% of this, it's something that for an industry reason can be directed toward black soldier fly larvae. You'll see the reason, okay? 50% of it. So 100 kilograms per person per year. A city like Los Angeles is 12 million people, Orange County together, 20 million people. A city of about 1 million people that produces 100,000 metric tons of food waste eatable by black soldier fly larvae every year will require about 4 acres of land as a factory. So that's nothing. That's very easy to secure 4 acres for a city that is 1 million people. That's my point. Now the bad news. Everything else was the commercial pitch up to this point. Why should you do it? Now there's the bad news. There's the life cycle to consider. The life cycle of this insect is called an insect with a complete metamorphosis, which means you are moving from a winged flying adult, lays eggs, and then they have to hatch. They produce the neonates, highly sensitive to anything that is around them, fungi, temperature, moisture, whatever. And then they have to grow to juveniles large enough for you to count. So you deliver the right amount in the growth bins. And then you grow the larvae from the juvenile stage to the harvestable stage. And then some of them are going to keep on growing to become pupae. And then the pupae rest and then goes back into the population of winged insects. It's a very complicated life cycle, and you'll see that has importance on how you organize this industry. There is interactions with other organisms that bother this life cycle. I think probably the most important is the war black soldier fly larvae have with Aspergillus fungi. There is a forever war, you know it already from biology classes, biology 101. There's a forever war between insects and fungi, and we know about that, and we even use it in agriculture, okay? And the problem is fungi, because they have to defend themselves against the insects that tend to eat them, are going to produce myco-insecticides. But at the other end, black soldier flies are developing those AMPs that are specialized in killing the fungi. So whichever one gets first into that bin wins the battle. You put too much food too early, the thing molds, too much biomass builds up, the myco-insecticides build up, they will wipe out your juvenile. You put too many larvae, they'll eat the fungi, but I don't have any food to eat, so you have to keep on adding. So it does have consequences on how you treat them and how many times you visit the bins and all that. The culture-specific parasites and pests are pretty much resolved in industry. We know how to control them. There is very limited knowledge about diseases. And people kind of are too trusty in this field. They say, no, this insect lives in garbage. They know how to deal with diseases. I don't think so. Because look what happened with the silk moths and look what happens with the honeybees. After 1,000 years of culturing them, guess what? There is hundreds of viruses and mites and everything that bothers them and destroys them. So I think we are in a very enthusiastic phase of this development, where we believe this might be the miracle solution, but I would expect more research should be invested into in order to figure out what systemic diseases we might develop in this culture. I'm going to skip the physiology. Anybody knows they're heterotrophs, and that has consequences. You can only go down. You cannot use something that humans will eat. You rather give it to humans. Don't give it to black soldier flies and then feed tilapia to eat the tilapia. Okay? Because they're heterotrophs, everything will go downstream in terms of amounts. Energy and calorie, carbon and potassium and everything will go down. And but that has a consequence. It's the biomagnification of pesticides. Even minute amounts of pesticides will accumulate in black soldier fly larvae if the materials that are at the source are contaminated because of biomagnification, because they eat so much. And because they accumulate, imagine pesticides that are lipophilic, and those larvae accumulate a huge amount of fats because they, as an adult, they do not eat. They have to have 30% body fat in order to withstand the wing period of the life cycle. So they can have this biomagnification of pesticides. As nutrition goes, in the case of insects that we humans eat, not me, but humans in general, we tend to kind of be so careful with what we feed them that at some point you reach a moment where you actually become ridiculous. For example, we are taking wheat flour and we put sugar and vitamins and we make these cookies that we can feed crickets so we can eat the cricket. As society, we already have the flour. So that doesn't have any future, if you ask me. Growing crickets with human food to eat the crickets, okay? So this is the advantage, if you like, of the good eaters, okay? They produce good quality protein, fine. The bad eater, the slow eater, the black soldier fly larvae, yes, they eat a lot of garbage, I know that, but that comes with consequences. There's a lot of microbial pathogens that exist in the beans, and you're not going to reduce them significantly with black soldier fly larvae. There is a lot of fungi that are growing at the same time. Aflatoxins may build up if fungi take over that culture because you're dumping so much food waste into the beans. And there is also toxins that are carrying over. For example, this is the reason why we cannot use in the feeding black soldier fly larvae, we cannot use post-consumer food waste because it's contaminated with microplastics and microplastic derivatives. And I have 3 slides to wrap up the bad news. I have 3 slides, one that deals with larvae feed quality. If I go in this slide, the feed composition for the black soldier fly larvae is right now better known, and we know proportions of proteins and fats and vitamins they need. And that creates some limitations in the market. We cannot cook the food, for example, you are destroying some temperature-sensitive vitamins. The feed pre-processing has become a major issue in this industry because on the one hand, you want to invest as little money as possible in prepping the food, but on the other hand, you want to make it as safe as possible so you don't have E. coli, salmonella, and whatever else. There is 4 methods that presently the industry is using. The most popular are refrigeration and fermentation. Okay? They have advantages, and these advantages we can discuss after this. As far as the sources of feed, I have divided everything that you have available as wastes in the society that contain calories and carbon and nitrogen, all that. I've divided them in 3 categories. One of them doesn't mean that the larvae will not eat them. They will eat them, but the purpose of that larvae will be different. So one of them, the A category, is things that are never going to make it actually in the larvae that we feed to the animals. And this is because we are talking about manure, sewage sludge, is so rich in pathogens that you can no longer fix the problem once you enter into a facility. And then there is the pesticides contaminated material that cannot possibly make it into the feed stream. In the B category are things that the larvae will eat, but either they are not that rich in amount, or they are local, like algae, or you can use it for something else, okay? Or it's too expensive to transport. For example, trimmings of vegetables are too expensive to transport. They have too much water. And the best will be the pre-consumer and food industry byproducts. And I listed in here some, you can see them. And think about vegetable pulps. Think about small breweries that are not drying for animal feeds because they are too small to dry. Think about whey. Okay, so there is a lot of feed. This chunk C is that 100 kilograms I mentioned. 100 kilograms per person per year. In the realm of quality of the protein that is produced, and not just protein, but the fat as well. In black soldier fly larvae, because the purpose of their fat is actually to stockpile energy because they do not eat as an adult, the fat content kind of reflects what they ate. So if you feed them with coconut pieces or banana peels or fish guts, the fat composition will vary a lot. And the protein composition is a little bit more consistent. In the protein case, what we are dealing with in industry is the post-processing of the larvae, because the way you dry them, the temperature that you are applying it, combined to the polyphenols that are already present, melanin, for example, is present in this mixtures, generates a combination between the proteins and the melanin that makes it less digestible. So the post-processing is very important. The industry does not have yet a standard on how to do it. The hazard I already mentioned, and you already felt them, pathogens, microbial toxins like mycotoxins and allergens, which are not even going to go over today. One problem that we have is there is no industry standard for the quality of the material that is called protein meal, which means we cannot put a value to it. We cannot say this material is worth $3 per kilogram or 50 cents per kilogram because of its quality. There is no industry standards. With regard to production costs, which are still struggling to catch up, if you consider a factory, a black soldier fly factory, I'm not going to describe how it works. Overall, you are getting factories all over the world that make it from $3.5 per kilogram to about $7.5 per kilogram. And the merchandise is not flying off the shelf too fast, especially if you make it at $7 and you want to get rich very fast or something. Because the fish meal is still below $2, and because the soy meal is below $1. So unless we do something with the industry to lower the production cost, and unless we do something happens to the world that will increase the protein or the cost of the other proteins, it's going to be very difficult for the ones that first constructed such a factory to actually survive. The largest expenses by far in this business are coming from energy, because you need to move materials left and right. And the largest is coming from labor. And to give you a relative understanding of this, for a factory to be successful in this business, for every worker in the factory, you have to produce about 0.5 metric ton of protein every day to make sense. And the amount of mass that you have to move, not just the beans, the amount of mass that you have to move every day, food coming in, food process, fermenters, pump it to the larvae, move the larvae back and right, collect the tubs, it's 100 times that. We are talking 50 metric tons has to be moved around, conveyor belts, cranes, and everything for every 0.5 metric ton of protein that you're producing, which is a major limitation. I'm going to skip this one. I'm only going to try to convince you that we are working in the field of trying to feed fish. This is just my proof of it. This is an experiment they did my colleagues, our colleagues at Florida Atlantic University on a red drum. It's a marine fish. And on the left, you actually see, yes, you see in here various treatments in which the fish meal was substituted with different levels with black soldier fly larvae meal from our company. So this is 100% substitution. This is 75%. This is 50, 25, and no substitution. And you can see that on this oranging, they still grow if you only feed them with black soldier fly larvae protein, apart from other things they have in the feed. But the margin, the area where it makes sense, it's about 50% presently. So there is more to be done in this level. The good news about this thing, it's about the amount that we can possibly produce. Because if you look at the amount of food waste humans are wasting, 100 kilograms per humans per year, 1 billion people, which is the sum of this country, okay? 1 billion people, with that 5% I mentioned before, means about 5 million metric tons. The current production of fish meal, it's anywhere between 5 and 6 million metric tons, okay? So we're close. The issue is, can we make it in terms of cost, production, efficiency, and all that? And that's how I end up with my take-home slide, okay? I'm only going to glance at the slide, give you a few pointers, so you see what's important in this industry to make it, okay? A very important issue is, in the very early days, you need to diversify the income model. So a lot of companies right now are producing black soldier fly larvae, but on the side, they push toward, they're saturating the market with dry larvae that is used as, for example, chicken treats and geckos, but there is only this many geckos you can possibly have, okay? And eventually, everybody right now tries to sell frass, which is the uneaten food, which means that a lot of larvae is actually going to go in the direction of food waste reduction, not necessarily producing protein until the market of protein recovers. And my guess, if you ask me, the way this industry is going to go is going to start becoming more and more fragmented. So it becomes more streamlined. So it's going to be people in Puerto Rico that are only going to produce eggs. It's going to people, they're not going to ship them UPS overnight. Somebody is going to take it from the hatchlings to the juveniles, count the juveniles, put them in boxes, and UPS them to Montana. And in Montana, they're going to take them with the food waste they have and throw them into the larvae and dry the larvae. And then another factory will take dry larvae into protein. My opinion is everything in this industry will go automation to handle all that huge amount of mass and fragmentation. Okay, I'll stop here to take some questions. Thank you very much.
Questions?
Is there a value to that frass that could, is it substantial enough to offset that cost of $3 to $7 a pound that you're getting for the meal, like as part of the total income of the production system?
It's possible because there is a lot of soil, organic soil right now. But there is more value to be added. I never got the chance to discuss it. There is more value to be added because as they come from the pupae, they leave the shell behind. And after the flies lay eggs, they die. So you can collect the shells and you can also extract chitin. Chitin becomes chitosan, an extremely valuable polymer. It's at minimum $60 per kilogram. So you can add streams of revenue that are coming from tipping fees, presently about $30 per metric ton. You can have your proteins, let's say that you make $150 per metric ton of the protein, and then you start having the frass, and then you start having the chitin, which you're producing anyway. So probably if you add all those things, they might make it.
Thank you. Any other questions? Anything from our virtual participants? No. All right.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Radu.
Mhm.
All right. I'm gonna queue up our next presenter slides. We have one more presentation for today. And our last presenter is Dr. Mo Arshadi with Clean Label Solutions, and he's going to be talking more about some of our sustainable or alternative feeds for aquaculture. This one. All right, Dr. Arshadi.
Thank you for having me. My name is Mohammed Ershadi, founder and CEO of Clean Label Solution. I would like to share some information about technology I've developed in order to improve the protein digestibility. Improve the protein digestibility of soy-based and larva-based animal feed right now as a fish meal substitute in the fish market. In this following slides, I go through why I found Clean Label Solution, what is our principles, what's the philosophy of Clean Label Solution, how we tackle the solution, how we look at the solution, how we find the solution for that, what's the order strategy, and give you some information about our product for salmon, shrimp, and the first non-commodity larva-based animal feed that we developed in our company. First, I give you a short bio of myself. I have a PhD in organic chemistry. I've been in Cornell between 2017 to 2020 as a senior researcher. Most of my research and career for the last 20 years, I developed clean and sustainable technology. For example, at Cornell, I developed a bioplastic from the tea leaf waste, and the other project, I developed a membrane from the grape seed for purification of oil from water. In Clean Label Solution, when I found this company, startup, there is three principles for every product we develop. We have to committed to these three categories. It should be cost effective, improve the quality and performance of the product in comparison to the commodity one in the market, and also should be green and sustainable technology. Every product that's been developed meet these criteria. We never produce commodity product. I personally don't believe and don't like, I'm not interested in commodity product in any form, because naturally the human didn't eat commodity product. They eat the process or maybe degraded or fermented commodity in the nature. In the fish market, as Dr. Eugene talked about, the fish meal is the problem in the fish industry because of the price. It's too expensive. The quality of each batch, maybe it's not the same. There is no consistency of the quality of the fish meal when you find or buy in the market. And the farmer won't be able to manage their budget in order to spend the budget to buy fish meal because of fluctuation and volatility of the price of the fish meal. And it's the production of producing of availability of fish meal in the market is not sustainable environmentally and ecology. And based on these facts, we developed a technology to produce a plant-based, actually soy-based animal feed to be substitute fish meal with the same performance, reduce the ration cost by 20% based on the technology that's been developed in comparison to the commodity or production cost reduced by 20%, while the performance and quality of our product is close to the fish meal. And it's a sustainable source of the protein that we could be provide for fish market. The details of the technology that's been developed inspired from the nature. We do a fermentation process on the soy-based animal feed. Why fermentation process? Because in the fish market or in the industry, there's a high population of the fish in a very restricted area. They should be feeding, and they should be grow and then enter to the market. Then when we use a fermentation process, we already break down the large protein molecule. So the fish spend less time, energy to digest and absorb more feed. Less time, save a lot of time of the market. It's improved the immune system of the fish and also save those part of the protein that been lost already. Right now, for example, those farms that using the commodity product. For salmon, the product is a victory fish feed has been developed to substitute the fish meal. In this slide, for example, when we replace 10% of the fish meal with our product, the body weight of the fish, the salmon, is the same as the fish meal. I mean, the growth rate is the same, nothing's changed. In order to the protein level of the fish meal, the salmon, you can see, as I already told you, because through the fermentation process, we break down the large molecule, it will be absorbed by the fish faster. The protein level of the fish, salmon, improved when in the fish meal, 10% of the fish meal in the ration cost been replaced with our product. In order to see our product improve, how it affects on the immune system of the salmon, we measure the lysosome activity in the salmon. When we feed with our product, the level of the lysosome activity improve. It's a related correction with the high level of lysosome activity in the salmon with the improvement of the immune system, because lysosome activity related to the antimicrobial activity of the salmon. They are being ready to defend, defeat, or infection or any pathogen activity on bacterial activity in the environment. It looks like they've been vaccinated when they feed with our product. And the other parameter is anti-protease serum. It's again, when the level of anti-protease serum increase in the salmon, it improves the immune system of the salmon in order to suppress the body damage or organ damage, because the protease break down the protein inside the organ or tissue of the salmon. And as we are expected, we right now selling 1,000 tons of our product per month in New York. And we both growth rate and immune system of the salmon improve when they feed into our product. The production cost reduced by 20%, ration cost of the farmer reduced. And also in the short term, the farmer that plant soy, they get benefit from that because they didn't export their soybean as a raw material. The other product we have is for the shrimp. It's been engineered for white leg shrimp. Again, when we remove 5 to 10% of the fish meal from the diet of the shrimp and replace with our product, the body weight of the shrimp didn't change. The growth rate was similar or the same, or sometimes better than the fish meal. In order the protein level, again, you see a little bit improvement on the protein level of the shrimp when they've been fed with our product. The dry matter of the shrimp body, we also tested, and we didn't see any significant change between the shrimp and the fed 100% fish meal with our product. I mean, the growth rate and the dry matter that been absorbed by the fish improved, all because of the fermentation process that's been developed. And they absorb faster and this more efficient feed and less energy they will consume through the process of absorption. In order to test the immune system of the shrimp, we can monitor the level of hemolymph protein that is responsible to attack the pathogen and parasite infection with the shrimp that can see when the shrimp been fed with our product, the level of the hemolymph protein improve in their bloodstream. That is another sign that the shrimp been fed with high quality product, because if there is a correlation between the high quality product and improving the immune system, the animal. The other parameters have been monitored is hemocyte. It's this hemocyte is a kind of the iron, it's a kind of the cell that support the immune system of the shrimp. Then again, is related to the quality and the balance of the nutrient that we deliver to the shrimp. Then the level of the hemocyte improves and increase into the bloodstream of the shrimp. It means they get the high quality product, and means the shrimp is happy with eating the feed. Then we replace 5 to 10% of our product with fish meal. Thank you. Both the growth rate and immune system, again, on shrimp improve, at least can say the same level as they've been fed with fish meal. The other product that we develop in our startup is larval-based animal feed, the non-commodity larval-based animal feed. The reason we pick up larval-based animal feed, because as Dr. Rado already talked about that, I missed this slide. The benefit of the larva convert waste, organic waste, to the protein, high value, high quality protein and oil that we produce. The demand for the larva increased in the last couple of years, but the price is very expensive. And as I already told you, it's again a commodity product. That's why the products of the price on the commodity is the same. It doesn't matter if you have a better commodity or low quality product. All the price on the commodity is the same. Everybody can produce. All of the technology that we develop in our company is proprietary technology. The technology that we develop for larva is 100% natural ingredient. We would be able to produce non-GMO of our product. We deliver high digestible protein to the feed, to the animal. CO2 emission reduced by 10% energy consumption through our process in comparison to the other farm that's produce and grows larva 20% reduced based on our technology. Time of operation, again, 20% reduced. And we're also working on the palatability of our product. And it's way better than the commodity one, because then through the process of fermentation, the aroma that's been released through the process increase the palatability and taste of the feed that is produced by our technology. In order to prove our claim about that we improve the protein digestibility of larval, I searched for a couple of years because there is no method in the market to test the digestibility of feed. There's no commercial method. I found the commercial method that's been developed like in Cornell. There is some lab use it, and you can send your sample over there to test your protein digestibility of your product. I give you the name of the lab farm, Cumberland Valley Analytical Services. I'm not here for advertising, just wants to give the reference for the data that I get from the lab, because through the process, the protein will be digested by pepsin, trypsin, chymotrypsin, amylase, and lipase, those similar enzymes that you could find in shrimp and salmon. So it could be give you a clue or a primary data about if you improve the digestibility of your product or not. And it's a very reliable data because when we get the data on the from the lab, it works on the farm. We have, because right now we produce more than 1,000 tons of our product, we sell it to the market, and we know it works. And different section, dairy farm, poultry, and fish farm. Based on our technology, the dry matter of our product been digested 32.2%. But the pristine black soldier larva, the digestibility just around 29%. About 3% we improved the digestibility of black soldier larva after 24 hours. In a short term, in 3 hours, this difference is doubled, about more than 10%. Because it's give them 24 hours, the numbers close to each other. Because through our fermentation process, as I already told you, the animals spend less time to digest more food because it's more digestible and absorbable by the animal. And this is the original format of the result that the lab provides for you when you submit your data. It's developed for the cow, but for just we take care of the total digestibility of the product in order to see how much protein being left after the digestion through the process that's been simulated by the intestine of the cow. But the enzyme that present in this process, same as the salmon shrimp. That's why we use this method. And finally, the reason the farmers are interested in our product, first, reduce the ration cost. They are happy with our product because productivity improves while the ration cost decrease both at the same time. Their immune system improves, and also through our process, it delivers more digestible protein to the animal that save those part of the protein that have been lost before. Thank you for listening to information I provide. I'm happy to take questions from.
Thank you so much. That was amazing.
All right. Dr. Arshadi, we have questions. Any questions? Brandon, did you have a question?
No, sir. Thank you, though.
Thank you. Well, curious about this because I have to make those decisions too. When you have a control that you call fish meal, could you describe that control? Is the entirety of the protein component of that fish meal that you're replacing, or is it representative of a commercial fish meal? So that's only a fraction of
Yes,
that.
yeah.
It's the,
About 10%, for example, if they give them, for example, 10 grams, they now give them 9 grams per day and 1 gram of our product.
Any other questions? Any questions from our virtual participants? Nope. All right.
when you're checking the digestibility through that lab, I guess that's some kind of in vitro digestibility, but you said that you were measuring it at the farm as well, and it was
Yeah,
consistent.
I
between
mean,
the
when
two?
I said measuring on the farm, I mean, the product that been developed based on this method show the high digestibility, the farmer get the benefit from, are happy on the animals, for example.
All right, last chance for questions. All right, thank you, Dr.
Sure,
Arshadi.
thank you.
All right, well, thank you to all our speakers today. So that does conclude the talks we had scheduled for today, but please do stick around. If late, there is a sign-in sheet in the back. Unfortunately,
So if we order food, we'll let you know. Gio's at the gym. Guess who else is at the gym? I might have to.
all right, hold on a second. Oh, thanks, Barry. Unfortunately for our virtual participants, you can't participate in the food, but thank you for joining and listening in today. We do have a variety of resources that are available up on this front table that we will happily be here to talk about. If you have any questions about New York Sea Grant, our seafood or aquaculture services and opportunities, please do let us know. Barry's setting up some food in the back. Today we have our local New York Hudson steelhead, so produced in a large-scale commercial recirculating aquaculture facility in Hudson, New York. There's various types of cold and hot smoked steelhead in the back, along with some other snacks. So please do stick around, ask our speakers questions, myself, Barry, our aquaculture specialist, or any of the other participants today. So we look forward to mingling. Yes, the talks were recorded. Yep, and we'll have them available after. We'll send a follow-up email to folks with that, as well as a link to all the resources we do have here in the room today. We'll send you a link because they are all available for free online as well. Thank you. Enjoy. Yes. You.